Hello and welcome to what is, I think, the fifth 18th Brumaire live stream. Today we're halfway through chapter 3. We hope to finish that and maybe, if we're exceedingly ambitious, head in to do a little bit of chapter 4. We have a pretty packed panel here today. Let's start off with the man all the way from Sweden. It's Europe versus the Americas. Today, Emmanuel, how's it going?
I'm great, Tom. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. Now, who else do we have? We have then the enemy over in Canada. Kyle, how are you?
Good. I was watching the French version of Nailed It last night.
What's that?
And it's a cooking show where you get really bad cooks on and they fuck up everything. And then the host kind of, sort of like say some nice things about it, and everybody feels happy at the end. But I was watching it was, it's like the Nailed It meme. But of course, the French version, being French, does not use the words nailed it, because that would be treason to France and the glorious French language. So they say c'est du gâteau instead of saying nailed it. But
what does that mean? It's a cake.
It's a cake.
Yeah, what the hell?
Yeah, it's not nearly as good. I was watching the French version. I was reflecting on how, Nailed It is really like the culinary version of the 18th Brumaire, especially the French one, because it's a farce. It's about France. It has inappropriate rape jokes. It's exactly what you would expect. I feel like I've just gotten ready by listening to some French and that wonderful Gaelic humor, and I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
So, are you saying that that Nailed It had rape humor in the show?
Yes, on the French version only. There was
of course.
Oh yeah. No,
just as like a casual turn of phrase while discussing cooking.
No, it opened with a Me Too joke, which was basically it was very similar to Marx's joke in the previous chapter, where it was saying like, it was like the episode was about love, and is basically saying this is the show where we take beautiful lady cakes and subject them to Me Too or something like this.
Wow.
So that's
wow.
That's France for you.
Very French.
I take everything nice that I said about the French last live stream. All of that cultural connecting we did last live stream have just been undone.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I mean, the French and rape, man. I got so many stories for you. We'll save it for after.
Save that for another show.
We did. That's a good place for
yeah. Let's okay.
Let's not.
Moving on.
When you said it was
Zarbamba to France.
When you said it was a cooking show, it was a different type of cook we're talking about.
Yeah.
Hey, boom, boom. Okay.
Well, they did get the French cock on there, so
Les coq.
Oh Lord.
Les coq au France. Now,
was it marinated in wine?
Oh God.
That's how I like it.
It was an episode that was about French patriotism, and they had symbols of France, and one of them was the cock to represent French sport.
Okay, so it's a cooking show. I got it.
Yeah. Emmanuel, that's not wine. Okay.
So, you gotta cut all this, Tom.
You're making more editing work for yourself.
Cut it off.
Cut it off. That's what my mother said. Now, okay. Also, from Arizona, we have Sophie. Sophie, how is it going?
It was going good, and now I'm here and listening to all this.
I'm sorry to pull you away from Facebook. Sorry to do that.
But piss off. Whatever. I'm not on that much.
Yeah.
I just shitpost a lot. Whatever.
Whatever. Speak to the hand. Okay, and finally, all the way from I have no fucking idea, nor do I care. Esri, how you doing?
Neither do I, baby. all I bring with you is the unambiguous words infantry, cavalry, artillery.
Okay.
Revolutionary credo.
Yeah, infiltrate.
We're really sassy today. Holy shit.
Yeah, I've been drinking.
Marx is getting to us. Marx is getting to us.
Look at the source material. Soon I'm going to be dunking on Anne Frank on Twitter.
Yeah.
Oh God, no.
Okay. Let's keep it off the swamp. Okay, and now we last week we kind of got into we were doing chapter 3, which is the fall of the petty bourgeois. Okay, so the defeat of the petty bourgeois democracy. And we had just gotten into a long kind of a piece where he started talking about how the Montagne made a mess of everything. And I think, Kyle, you were reading, so let's jump back into where we picked off because he's really going to go hard on the petty bourgeois democratic socialists or whatever we want to call them here. It's not pretty. Let's have a go.
All right. No party exaggerates its means more than the Democratic. None deludes itself more light-mindedly over the situation. Since a section of the army had voted for it, the Montagne was now convinced that the army would revolt for it. And on what occasion? On an occasion which, from the standpoint of the troops, had no other meaning than that the revolutionists took the side of the Roman soldiers against the French soldiers. On the other hand, the recollections of June 1848 were still too fresh to allow of anything but a profound aversion on the part of the proletariat towards the National Guard and a thoroughgoing mistrust of the democratic chiefs on the part of the chiefs of the secret societies. To iron out these differences, it was necessary for great common interest to be at stake. The violation of an abstract paragraph of the Constitution could not provide these interests. Had not the Constitution been repeatedly violated according to the assurances of the Democrats themselves? Had not the most popular journals branded it as counter-revolutionary botch work? But the Democrat, because he represents the petty bourgeoisie, that is, a transition class in which the interests of two classes are simultaneously mutually blunted, imagines himself elevated above class antagonism generally. The Democrats concede that a privileged class confronts them, but they, along with all the rest of the nation, form the people. What they represent is the people's rights. What interests them is the people's interests. Accordingly, when a struggle is impending, they do not need to examine the interests and positions of the different classes. They do not need to weigh their own resources too critically. They have merely to give the signal, and the people, with all its inexhaustible resources, will fall upon the oppressors. Now, if in the performance their interests prove to be uninteresting and their potency impotence, then either the fault lies with pernicious sophists who split the indivisible people into different hostile camps, or the army was too brutalized and blinded to comprehend that the pure aims of democracy are the best thing for it. Or the whole thing has been wrecked by a detail in its execution, or else an unforeseen accident has this time spoiled the game. In any case, the Democrat comes out of the most disgraceful defeat just as immaculate as he was innocent when he went into it, with the newly won conviction that he is bound to win, not that he himself and his party have to give up the old standpoint, but, on the contrary, that conditions have to ripen to suit him.
Fucking Russians.
What do you mean by that?
Oh my God.
Well, you know, like when your party loses, right? The last thing you want to do is reevaluate your strategy, right? Because you know the strategy's good. It's fine. What must have happened is some kind of wrecking, some kind of tampering with your perfect formula. You understand?
Yeah.
Okay,
Apparently, this is a petty bourgeois Democrat sort of reflex as old as time, or at least as old as, you know, this mode of production.
Well, there's
I was-
also the line of you gotta wait for the conditions to ripen. Hearing Tankies
Yeah.
talk about that is always super hilarious. And also, someone who's worked for the petty bourgeois several times, let me tell you, this is hella true. They are
Mhm.
delusional.
Back on the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Emmanuel,
I mean-
you had something to say.
Yeah, like this together with his very acute observations about social democracy that read as true today as back then. Like I couldn't help myself but read these two in the same light, and like just reading this as like when he says the Democrat. Picturing an actual like Joe Biden Democrat made it so much funnier because even though it's a long time before it still holds very, very, very true. But I couldn't help thinking that like are we guilty of this as well? Like because talking to other Marxists in these weird cults. That we in one way or the other relate to somehow. I mean, talk to any Marxist, and most of them will say, "Well, revolution is inevitable. Like the revolution will come, and things will happen." And if you're a Marxist humanist, you think that there will be some kind of spontaneous uprising or whatever. If you're a tanky, you think it's a vanguard party that will solve everything. But like this caricature of the Democrat who's like ever the optimist, and any evidence to the contrary, like any evidence of crippling defeat, is taken as the conditions must be, well, we were too early, or whatnot. So I couldn't help thinking that, like, man, are we guilty of this too? Like, it's not, we're not doing anything wrong. It's just, with global capitalism, like late stage capitalism and whatever, it's just too difficult a time to do anything worthwhile.
Well, I will say in our defense, we did do the Revolutionary Strategy series, which was the longest goddamn podcast series ever made, trying to not do what this paragraph says.
Yeah.
That's what the whole Emancipation Network podcast kind of is about.
Yeah, but you're like 5 people.
I know, but this is how things. This is what,
Right.
I know, but
That's
you
right.
did use the term "us," so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to
I meant
give a little bit.
I meant the larger collective, Kyle. The historical tendency.
Sure.
The ghosts of revolutions past.
I think we could also see this, especially in the United States, from where I'm sitting right here in the beginning of May. For some reason, the people that have told us to throw in on the Sanders campaign twice still have, sway on the left, and we're supposed to still listen to them for strategic advice.
Are you referring to Michael Brooks, maybe?
I'm referring to a whole stable of sort of associated intellectuals around Jacobin. Let's, say that. Like that. I mean,
they're new dealers. They're just simple new dealers. That's all they are.
If they were new dealers that learned from their mistakes, that would be one thing. And yeah, you know what? It was really plausible that, oh man, the Democratic establishment is so sclerotic. Let's really double down on this Bernie shit again. You could even point this at Bernie himself. Now, obviously, it's a little different because we're talking like we could think really hard about the power structures within the Democratic Party that made this not happen. But then there is this kind of metaphysical notion that the people, a sort of Rousseauian, not a universal will, but the general will of a nation, the popular will. It's gonna burst through at some point, you guys. We just gotta keep doing the same goddamn thing. And
The
let
people
me
will
tell you.
revolt.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to do the right thing. This is the essential point. Yeah, you need to do the right things, and what's being done now is a farce. You know, as we go into the further down in the what happens by these in the next couple of chapters as well about what the Social Democrats do, it's pathetic, and it nearly maps. The weird thing is, it nearly maps onto Bernie perfectly. I mean, absolutely perfectly. It's incredible. Before we go on, I want to just do a little bit here about in case people are not that up on the the actual history stuff. I know people probably dip in and out of these things when they're listening, but like, so the idea here was that, just to kind of bridge the gap from last week, was that Napoleon sent a whole load of troops down into Italy to kick the crap out of the Roman Republic against the wishes of Parliament. And the Social Democrats said, well, you can't do that, it's illegal. And they kind of basically said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he said, if you don't do that, we'll go out in the streets. And they went out, the petty bourgeois, the Social Democrats, and they marched with their National Guard. These are the same National Guard who let the massacre by the army happen to the proles only like 1 year ago. So all the general people, the proles everywhere, were like, screw these guys. And the National Guard didn't even have any guns. So when they went out, basically nothing happened, and it was a total damn squib, and they fell on their ass. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. But so just
importantly, they had guns. They chose not to bring them.
Oh, they still had them at this stage. They did, didn't they?
Yeah. And that was basically the end of the petty bourgeois National Guard, because they had the guns, they went out, they got their asses kicked, and then that was the end of it.
Always bring your guns.
So there's something in here that I want to ask people about here. This part here. But the Democrat, because he represents the petty bourgeoisie, that is a transition class in which the interests of two classes are simultaneously mutually blunted, imagines himself elevated above class antagonism generally. Now, is this our professional managerial class in today's world? And if so, is Marx wrong to call it a transition class? Because I think Marx had the idea that the petty bourgeois would be more and more essentially driven down and into the proletariat. But like with this destruction of the petty bourgeoisie, we also kind of have a concomitant rise of a managerial class. So is this a problem with Marx's class analysis? What do people think?
I don't think so. I think we've got to leave that to the next series we're doing, because we're going to get so deep into that question there. Yes. And you know, I think that looking on my own experience, this was definitely my ideology growing up. I grew up with the CBC radio, which is petty bourgeois consciousness, just, you know, par excellence. And
that'd be like NPR in the United States.
Yeah. It's a little different, but yes.
More culturally important, more like the BBC or something.
It's
situate it for me. You're from an alien planet.
Okay. So it's very much inspired by, say, the liberalism of like Lester B. Pearson, which I guess you could say is maybe a little bit less. It's a little bit more left, you might say, than NPR. It's okay. It's really like tied up with the Canadian state as a mediator for all classes and a common national project of bringing together the nation and bringing together the classes. And also very heavily sort of like influenced by like kind of like left-wing Protestantism, which is the same as NPR, I guess you could say there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's got something that's a little bit more Tory, a little bit more British than NPR, I guess you might say.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I grew up with. Totally believe this stuff. I remember actually after one election when I was a kid, my mom was talking to me and she was like, "Well, what did you think about the election results?" And I was like, "Well, I think everybody won in their own way." And that was the message that CBC Radio was sending me. Okay, so this is exactly what Marx is talking about here, so I think it is absolutely something you see in the PMC. It is also something you just see in the petty bourgeoisie. Like I have a friend who's actually he's been on General Intellect, Bob Neubauer. His family, part of his family comes from sort of like, old stock Canadians, upper Canadians, like, real waspy kind of types, who are, some of them are bourgeois, some of them are petty bourgeois, and they also completely have this ideology. So I think you can still find this ideology of the petty bourgeoisie, even if it isn't exclusive to them.
Yeah,
I would say from a Scandinavian perspective, or actually I can't speak for the rest of Scandinavia, but Sweden specifically, this is a scathing and very accurate description of basically our entire political history and the ideology to I think even the left subscribes to. So, we've had the Social Democratic Party in power for most of our history, and it was founded, and the ideology is exactly this. We can bridge all class antagonisms by tweaking a little bit of this in capitalism, and doing a little bit of that, and making sure that the unions and the employer associations are friendly and the negotiations go well. And if we just manage this enough, everyone can calm down and we can have a cup of coffee and we can discuss our differences and, in a civil manner, and everything will be fine. So I totally relate to that. The more I hear, the more I listen to you, Kyle, the more I feel like, Canada is very similar, like ideologically and culturally too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In many, many ways.
Yeah. And sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Ezri.
I was going to slightly pivot based on this idea of petty bourgeois class interests not being really, maybe I'm calling back. It's not so much about Marx's predictions about proletarianization and the petty bourgeois, more about how the proletariat, like the bourgeoisie, has a universalizable class interest that you can form an economic order around, And therefore, that potential is prefigured by the, supposed potential ability for there to be a coherent party based on their interests, right? The petty bourgeois is too fractious and disparate. It doesn't have enough actual common interest at heart, or if it does, it's too throat-cutting competitive within itself to be capable of generalizing in such a way where you get political institutions that can actually be said to be on a petty bourgeois basis. Some accounts of the Soviet Union look at it that way, and that the Soviet Union, because it was based on essentially a managerial class interest, it wasn't sustainable until it collapsed into one or the other camp of the bourgeoisie or the proletariat.
Yeah, I mean, Marx comments on that in the paragraph above, I think, or a few paragraphs above, where he describes the petty bourgeoisie as like the reason that they represented the reason that social democracy represented the petty bourgeoisie is not because the petty bourgeoisie has any like material class interest the way the aristocracy has, or the way that the real like capital B bourgeoisie has a material class interest, but simply because they can't imagine a different society, right? They may identify or sympathize more with workers or whatever, but they're still stuck in the democratic Republican everyday way of life that they have no way of thinking outside the box, and that is why they are like the petty bourgeoisie. It's not because of any sort of weird materialist thing, but that has the result of like materially supporting the bourgeois order, etc. But
right, because they spread their weakness to the proletariat through this social democratic class compromise program.
Yeah, I think
which is just it's just such a great criticism of social democracy. Like I can't believe this is this old, because like we have editorials almost every week calling out the Social Democratic Party on this exact point. And we've had that for like the past 4 years since the last election, and like reading the exact same thing with Marx. It's just like, this guy, man, he knew what was going on.
I have a question for you all. Like, I presume we've all gone to college, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Many times.
Yeah. Some of us never left, indeed. But like this describes my class of friends, essentially. I think of all the people I went to college with, I don't know how many I know that have similar politics to me, that I came up with. And because I'm new to Marx and all that, I didn't like go to college, and I wasn't like a lefty in college or anything like this. I was just a piss artist, so it's like it's kind of staggering to me, like, because when I meet my friends now, they go home and it's like, how's it going, blah blah, and we talk about a few things, and like I do feel like, oh my God, these petty bourgeois. Do you get that at all with people who like your friends from college or stuff like that? It's just a personal life thing.
So my first graduate program, I'm in the process of trying to get into a different one. My first graduate program was social justice and human rights. And let me tell you, this program was a study in this. Now, to be fair, there were some professors in some classes that are really cool, and I learned a lot. We read, who wrote Planet of the Slums?
Mike Davis.
Mike Davis. We read Planet of Slums.
Yes.
And Mike Davis. We read some other stuff that was cool, but not as cool as that. Like, Foucault is the old standby in college, lefty thought. And just some other interesting stuff. But for the most part, the atmosphere of the college, the people I went to classes with a few exceptions, were this, basically. And let me tell you, I dropped out of that program for a reason. I mean, I was also failing, but well.
But you were failing for a reason. It's because the program was failing to describe reality.
I was failing for a reason because
the conditions for study was not yet ripe.
The conditions for study were not yet ripe, and my mental health was failing. I mean, everything was wrong with the program.
There you go, Payne. Now you're thinking like a social democrat.
Right, it's never my fault. It's other people's fault.
Which, if you've ever been in a small business situation,
100%.
If anything goes wrong in the small business situation, you can see the main sort of proprietor being like, how can I make this someone else's fault? Even if it's someone I love, and even if it'll harm them. I don't care. It has to be someone else's fault. It just has to.
You make it sound like that's not a thing in big business.
No, I'm not.
Like-
Look, they often have some kind of boardroom or some shit where, like, you know, with a board of investors. This is actually why, like, you know, oh, the small is beautiful model doesn't scale. Is that after a while, if you have a board of investors being like, look, I care more about my money than your delusions, shut up. Maybe we should get rid of you. You know?
Yeah,
That's
eventually someone's
useful.
like, fuck you, you lost me money, get out of here. Like, eventually the buck stops. Whereas when
Right.
Yeah, Steve Jobs, get the hell out of Apple. Screw you.
there
Well,
is happens to the
now,
world.
that's a classic Stalin situation where without that kind of hegemonic sociopathic bully, you get a kind of drift that leads to things like Apple Watches.
Yeah. You don't have an Apple Watch, do you, Esri?
No, of course not.
She
He
does.
100% has one.
Oh my
What?
god.
I'm sorry, I'm not paying
Oh my
attention.
god. My god, they are so naff. Right. Yeah, no, it is kind of staggering, like how the class stuff, just in my own personal life, when I read this stuff and I think about it, you know, how determined by
Sorry,
class
you
we are.
broke up there? What was-
Sorry, how it's staggering how determined by class we are on average. I remember when I was playing poker for a living, I remember there was this guy, he was a dealer. So he was like a real working class guy, and he was dealing the cards. And poker is basically just like a coterie of kind of rich guys who don't know how to play, and you basically take their money. That's essentially
Right.
how you make your living. And somebody got talking about politics or something, and they asked me on what I was reading. I think I was reading Capital Volume 2 when I was playing.
Yeah.
Such a nerd. And they were saying, oh, are you Marx? I said, I'm a Marxist. Yeah, yeah. And the dealer looked up and he was like, yeah. He goes, oh, I'm an anarchist. And he's like, yeah, right on, brother, kind of thing. And then he was like, oh, these rich fuckers. He says, if you had my way, I just killed them all. And we're sitting at the table, and there was like pure silence. And I was like, saying to you, man, like, all right, yeah, just trying to get him, like, I want these guys to stay here so I could take their money. I was making really good money. Like, there was like a few real dopes there, and like, it was just taking money off these rich guys. And man, I was like, a rich person would never say it. They would never say, you know, like, it was
So he was literally saying, all I want to do is bam, 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 and take your money.
He was literally looking around the table, and he was going like, fucking kill the rich, you know, like, and he was looking around. Oh man, it was too funny. I had to try and not laugh. It was fucking hilarious.
You got
Tom, honestly,
whenever
is
you're in
there a
that
single job in the world you haven't had? You've been a professional poker player. You've worked at a bank. You're a fucking mathematician. You're a some kind of weird Marxist cult leader on running live shows. What haven't you done?
I'll tell you what I did for a good while.
Don't you have a fucking degree in music as well? Like,
no, I was a musician. I was a classical musician as well, and
right,
and
yeah, okay.
bands as well. But yeah, but I
yeah,
was
so that's one more.
I was an organist in the cathedral.
Holy fucking shit!
Yeah,
this is Renaissance man. That's what we got here. You didn't know that from Alpha to Omega listeners.
just good enough to be above average at a lot of things. That's all.
Next time on From Alpha to Omega, Tom admits to having been a doctor in a previous life.
That would be good.
Not a great doctor, but a
Do you know
doctor.
what my favorite job was? Probably my favorite job ever, right? Was emptying returned cartons of sour milk. And it was
That is a very specific job.
What? I had a big vat. I'd have this big vat that would hold like 1,000 gallons or something. And I'd have stacks of cartons of milk that would come returns from the shops, and they'd all be sour. And I'd have to bash them on the side of this vat. And so they'd empty into this thing. And then I'd throw the empty carton into a big container that we'd set fire to every day. And I'd sit there for hours emptying pints of sour milk. And it was a very enjoyable job, just all day. Like back then, you had no music around, just sitting on your own in a room, emptying sour milk. Swear to God, it was fucking really enjoyable. I smelled like shit though at the end of the day, I must say. But
you're saying it's like a Zen thing, or you could just dissociate?
Competitive.
I love how all of these shows at one point has like a small chapter from Tom O'Brien's autobiography
I was just going to say, based on that story there, Tom, maybe Fourier was right about using the individual inclinations of people to perform socially necessary work that many others might not see as enjoyable.
But there's something to be said about repetitive physical labor where you can space out. No one's bothering you. You're just on your own. You can do it like for a few hours. You know, like if I had podcasts then, I swear to God, I would never gone to fucking college probably. I would just fuck this. I mentioned sour milk. You know, but like I think there's a lot to be said for kind of, or even just washing the dishes in your house. I like washing my dishes. You know, I think, but I don't like ironing. So, you know, fuck that. Anyway, let's keep going. This is like totally off the rails here.
So I just want to ask one thing regarding this petty bourgeois consciousness stuff. Have any of you watched Extract? The what was it? The Mike Judge movie? It was like the kind of like semi sequel to Office Space. Like so it was like Office Space, which is about like the office proletariat, and then there's Extract, which is about the petty bourgeoisie.
Interesting.
I feel like we should watch that sometime and see how it maps on to what Marx is saying here. Because like he like has to deal with a strike, and it's about this Extract a factory owner. It's like a very small factory, and he's a petty bourgeois, and it's about his marital life and dealing with the workers, and I don't know, should be a good time.
Wow. Move over, guy that directed Parasite. Mike Judge, classicure of our time.
It is definitely not written from the perspective of the workers. Let me tell you that.
I believe that. Have you seen Idiocracy? Yeah.
Hey. That's quite funny.
It's funny, but it's also very Malthusian.
Yeah, it's very liberal. It's like, you know...
God, if only everyone watched The Daily Show.
And it's genetically deterministic, I think, too, you know. But it is actually kind of funny. I like the best television program was Kicking Guys in the Balls. And that made me fucking laugh. That's what Jackass is. I like Jackass. You know, what the fuck does that say?
I mean, that movie is flawed, but we have a WWE person in the office. He's talking to the Vince McMahon to be some kind of economic advisor. Like,
he was going to be the chief of the panel for economic recovery was going to be Vince McMahon.
If anyone knows how to run a business into the ground, it's Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon's from, his like a childhood fixture growing up was driving by the WWE office on the way to and from school.
Yours?
Yeah. Stamford, Connecticut. Yeah. I've been in that building. I photocopied my ass in that building.
Nice.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Esri trivia. You don't just get Tom trivia here. This is where you come to learn about everything except for what we're reading.
Well, that's it. But
let's keep going.
What you don't realize, Esri, is that I'm going to cut your bit out. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so I'm going to read this.
True. It's only on my OnlyFans. Yeah.
It's the next bit to this paragraph, Ison, the petty bourgeois social democrats. Okay, I'll read this bit. Therefore, one must not imagine the Montagne, decimated and broken though it was, and humiliated by the new parliamentary regulation, as being particularly miserable. If June the 13th had removed its chiefs, it made room, on the other hand, for men of lesser calibre, whom this new position flattered. If their impotence in Parliament could no longer be doubted, they were entitled now to confine their actions to outbursts of moral indignation and blustering declamation. If the party of order affected to see embodied in them, as the last official representatives of the revolution, all the terrors of anarchy, they could in reality be, as the last official representatives of the revolution, all the terrors of anarchy, they could in reality be all the more insipid and modest. They consoled themselves, however, for June 13th with the profound utterance, but if they dare to attack universal suffrage, well then we'll show them what we are made of. We shall see. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we'll show them who's boss.
Nous verrons!
Nous verrons! No, I'm finding it very like it's very like we map it the two most kind of dominant left stories of the English speaking world of the last while has been, Bernie and Corbyn. But it's very hard to read this and not just map this goddamn stuff so directly onto being left with Keir Starmer or somebody who's at the moment he's so wishy-washy. He won't. They had some political representative on and they were talking about why the hospitals were all run down and they weren't prepared for this. And one of his ministers on it said, and who do you blame for that? And she's, instead of saying, it's the fucking Tories with their austerity, like everybody in the coal country knows, right? They said, oh, well, we don't want to point fingers now.
Respectable social democrats. Respectable social democrats.
I mean that is so British. It could just as well be in Sweden. Like,
and so what's the equivalent? But if they get rid of the NHS, nous allons.
Yeah, as they have already privatized like fucking 50% of it off.
Yeah, you don't have to get rid of it. Just fuck it up.
And Labour helped.
Yeah. Now, the next paragraph here, we won't have to read it, only maybe the last sentence, is talking about the leaders, these of the Social Democrats, Ledru Roland, and these guys. They basically had to leg it out of the country, and they set up like a provisional government off, like in, I don't know where the hell, in Germany or somewhere. And Proudhon, they started really bloviating and acting like they were really going to run back to France and wipe everybody out in a revolution. Let's read what Proudhon had to say about them. Was Proudhon altogether wrong when he cried to these gentlemen, "You are nothing but windbags"?
Can we get the French here?
Yeah, okay.
Vous n'êtes que des blagueurs.
Des blagueurs. You're a blagger. That's interesting because in England they have the same word, a blagger. Do you have that word in America?
I wonder.
No, we don't have that word.
More likely to use windbag.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Yeah, so it's French. I never knew it was a French word. Like, so it's like somebody who's a pretender. You're a blagger. You could if you can pass yourself off as one thing or another. They blagueur.
Yeah. Here we call them bloggers. I think there might be a different linguistic route though.
I hope they're not.
I'm learning so many like archaic Swedish insults reading the Swedish translation.
Sweet.
In the Swedish translation, it's skrävlare, and just like knävelborr, which was the mustache, I have no fucking clue what it is. But skrävlare is apparently a blagueur. So some kind of hack fraud.
Full of hot air.
Yeah.
What do you call it? I had a dictionary at home, and it was an English dictionary from it must be 120 or 30 years ago. It must have been from the 1880s. It was printed in Russia in the Soviet Union. So this tells you, I bought it new, but it was obviously the 1990 or something when I bought it. So they must have had an out of copyright English dictionary that they translated. And to put it into context, they didn't have a number of the planets in it. They didn't have if you looked up car, it said a carriage for a horse. This is what it had in it. It's a crazy dictionary. It's called the Burlington English Dictionary. They just made that fucking shit up. But in it, they had I remember reading in an old book. I was reading some I don't know when, early 20th century book, and somebody called somebody a fop. And I looked at it, I said, what's a fop? So I got this dictionary down and I said, a fop. And I had after it, fop is a coxcomb. I was like, what the fuck is a coxcomb? And then I went to coxcomb and I said, a coxcomb is a fop. I was like, fuck that.
Wow.
I thought you were going to say a coxcomb is a schmemmel blah, and then you would keep going down the rabbit hole. But this is even better. I
think, I can't remember. I thought there was 3 before, and when I went to show Precious there, last time I was at home, I found the dictionary. I said, "Look at this, look at coxcomb," and there was only 2 of them. But I did think there was another one in there. Anyway, let's keep going. I'm full of stories today. You give me a 0 alcohol beer, fucking it starts flowing.
Yeah, damn.
Flowing. Okay, now let's.
Tom, it always starts flowing with you, man.
That's true.
Yeah.
The gift of the gab. All right, let's go. Right, who wants to have a read?
I'll take a
Let's
crack.
see. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let's go. Okay, so
Uh,
yeah, he's going to continue here on about.
Different host, Tom.
He's going to continue on about the. Sure. Let's just go. Fuck it.
Let's do it. On June 13th, the Party of Order had not only broken the Montaigne, it had affected the subordination of the Constitution to the majority decisions of the National Assembly. And it understood the Republic thus, that the bourgeoisie rules here in parliamentary forums without, as in a monarchy, encountering any barrier such as the veto power of the executive or the right to dissolve parliament. This was a parliamentary republic, as Thiers termed it. But whereas on June 13th, the bourgeoisie secured its omnipotence within the House of Parliament, it did not afflict Parliament itself, as against the executive authority and the people with incurable weakness by expelling its most... Okay, let me try this again.
Start from but whereas.
Yeah. But whereas on June 13th, the bourgeoisie secured its omnipotence within the House of Parliament, did it not afflict Parliament itself as against the executive authority and the people with incurable weakness by expelling its most popular part? By surrendering numerous deputies without further ado on the demand of the courts, it abolished its own parliamentary immunity. The humiliating regulations to which it subjected the Montaigne exalted the President of the Republic in the same measure as it degraded the individual representatives of the people. By branding an insurrection for the protection of the Constitutional Charter and Anarchic Act, aiming at the subversion of society, it precluded the possibility of its appealing to insurrection, should the executive authority violate the Constitution in relation to it. And by the irony of history, the general...
I don't think you need to go on because... Oh, maybe okay. It just goes on for some rubbishy stuff there. We don't really need it. But like...
Yeah. So the basic point being like, yeah, if you play, Black Bloc is a cancer, and then a dictator takes over, you can't play anti-fascist resistance.
Yeah, they thought they had defeated their enemy, but they had also inflicted wounds on themselves, which turned out to be essentially a Pyrrhic, for the parliamentary order of the bourgeoisie, it was a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, you got to pick one. Either you're, against all, direct action, and in this case, look, insurrectionary direct action was on the table. It was not totally beyond the political pale in this environment. So, whether that's true for our times, whatever. But if you're going to be against all insurrectionary direct action, and then your precious Constitution gets subverted by a would-be Bonaparte, you just can't make recourse to that anymore.
Aye. Anybody have any thoughts, Kyle, on that paragraph? Or
I was just reminded, this is not a quality thought, but I was just reminded of that wonderful meme that came out around the time of Occupy of Chris Hedges, where he was, it's got all the panels of him saying really edgy shit about get out on the street, join the people, revolution is here. And then as soon as the shop fronts start getting destroyed by Black Bloc, he's like, no, it's gone too far.
No, but that's when I was saying that, the Black Bloc is a cancer. I was talking about an article that he wrote at the time. And
yeah.
Frankly, during Occupy, I did not understand why people were so cautious about criticizing the Black Bloc. Because if I'm honest, where I saw it implemented, maybe in Oakland it had a place. On UC Davis's campus, which is this idyllic cow town or whatever, seemed like one of those copy-pasted tactics that seemed a little LARPy and out of place. So I didn't think I understood it at the time. But I could tell that there was something that Chris Hedges threw out the baby with the bathwater in, all out condemning categorically the Black Bloc tactic.
So I'm curious where you read in the Black Bloc stuff and the insurrection stuff here, because to my understanding, he's talking about what happens when you enable Parliament to essentially rewrite the Constitution and thus expelling. I'm actually not sure what he's referring to with the most popular part.
It's the line here: by branding an insurrection for the protection of the constitutional charter, an anarchic act aiming at the subversion of society, it precluded the possibility of its appealing to insurrection should the executive authority violate the Constitution in relation to it.
Right.
Hold on. Where are we in the text there?
It's in the middle of the paragraph. On June 13th is the party.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. So right, by branding an insurrection for the, but okay, all right, okay. So then I kind of see what you're talking about, but
So he's like, we're making the case as leftists about branding and tactic by one of our own subversion. Like, you're kind of, when if things go wrong, don't be laughing at, don't like. I don't know. Somebody say it more clearly than me.
I guess I would relate this to the conversation we had about Kautsky and Luxembourg, and Kautsky's theory that essentially, you don't really need like mass strikes like so much if you have these parliamentary means that are going to secure socialist transition. Just to make a rough analog, you have a kind of de facto legalism that looks down on certain types of, mass activity. Look, we're not going to need that stuff, okay? We already have the method. What happens when the method gets subverted, and it starts to build something that, even though you signed off on like kind of working within the state, what happens when the state starts going in the other direction? Doesn't start marching towards socialism again? That's an echo of this conversation.
I think, though, that you're closer to the mark when you mention Chris Hedges and the Black Bloc as a cancer idea, because it's not just a matter of suggesting one strategy is superior to the other. It's a kind of expression of outrage against the violation of the constitutional social order. And the order of property. And that when you go and make those like really fiery claims that like, this is a cancer, it's not just, it's misguided, it's a cancer, then you simply can't go, oh, but now we got to take guns to the streets and defend the Constitution, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, okay. So now I'm getting you, because that point, Kyle, was what I was reading into this as well. That similar to the point that he made earlier on in, I believe, chapter 2, when he was like, well, you taught the army how to govern, so what the fuck did you expect? And here it's like, okay, if you brand people who are taking to the streets to protect the Constitution, if you're calling them dangerous anarchists, then that's going to come around and bite you in the ass if you need an insurgency yourself later on. So that's all good. But what was the most popular part? I'm not exactly sure what exactly he's referring to.
The mountain. He's talking about the mountain.
Right.
Okay. When Trier and company kicked the mountain out, they surrendered the most popular part of Parliament.
Yeah, thus endangering Parliament as an institution.
Sure. Okay.
Makes
sense.
Let's move it on. Emmanuel, how do you feel about reading these couple of paragraphs?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read off of your screen, Tom. So June 13th had still another meeting. The Montagne had wanted to force the impeachment of Bonaparte. Its defeat was therefore a direct victory for Bonaparte, his personal triumph over his democratic enemies. The party of order gained the victory. Bonaparte had only to cash in on it. He did so. On June 14th, a proclamation could be read on the walls of Paris, in which the president, reluctantly, against his will, compelled as it were by the sheer force of events, comes forth from his cloistered seclusion and, posing as misunderstood virtue, complains of the calumnies of his opponents, and, while he seems to identify his person with the cause of order, rather identifies the cause of order with his person. Moreover, the National Assembly had, it is true, subsequently approved the expedition against Rome, but Bonaparte had taken the initiative in the matter. After having reinstalled the high priest Samuel in the Vatican, he could hope to enter the Tuileries as King David. He had won the priests over to his side. The revolt of June 13th was confined, as we have seen, to a peaceful street procession. No war laurels were therefore to be won against it. Nevertheless, at a time as poor as this, in heroes and events, the party of order transformed this bloodless battle into a second Austerlitz. Platform and press praised the army as the power of order, in contrast to the popular masses representing the impotence of anarchy, and extolled Charnier as the bulwark of society, a deception in which he himself finally came to believe. Surreptitiously, however, the corps that seemed doubtful were transferred from Paris. The regiments which had shown the most democratic sentiments in the elections were banished from France to Algiers. The turbulent spirits among the troops were relegated to penal detachments. And finally, the isolation of the press from the barracks and of the barracks from bourgeois society was systematically carried out.
And it must be said, that's being kind of carried out in all armies, in any bourgeois state. It's hard to imagine that there is any political activity in a thing like the British Army. There's like absolute zero. And I'd say if you did do it in the British Army, they would essentially either have you killed during training, which they do on a surprising regularity, run people to death. Yeah, every year there's like a few people have been run to death in training exercises.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Wow.
Yeah, so like I don't know if that's a political one, but you could imagine that's what they would actually do. Or they bully. They have incredible bullying. They have cases of people like being in fear of their life that are going to get shot by people in their own regiments. So you can imagine that the armies in a lot of the countries, like in the important imperial countries, I'd say.
What the fuck did they even do? I'm sorry, did you say important imperial countries? I thought you were talking about England, Britain.
They're the second biggest imperial invader. You know, it's them in the US that does everything. Like they're
for sure, but
partner.
I mean, the US still has most of its territories. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well,
let's not get into dick waving contests over our respective imperialist countries.
We're the most vicious.
Let's get past this. The more that the British lose is the better with me. But but you want them to be to independent countries, don't you? Not these.
I do especially hate Britain. Just gonna say anyway.
Same. Yeah, I'm for the disaggregation of both empires. Just
same.
Absolutely, yeah, of all empires. Now, but what were we saying? Yeah, so like it seems like, you know, France was the first to have probably a proper modern republican revolutions, and they quickly figured out what to do with the goddamn armed forces and not let them be democratic. It did not take them very long, did it?
Well, it took them quite a while, honestly. This is quite a while after things kicked off, but this is where they did figure it out and were able to actually do it. Because like the National Guard was the decisive revolutionary force in the previous revolutions of the 19th century. So like, you know, it took a while to really kill that citizen militant revolutionary kind of character.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, listening to the Mike Duncan Revolutions podcast, like, time and time again, especially in like France and like other European revolutions, it's the National Guard. And I kept thinking to myself, like, why do these old regimes just keep being like, oh yeah, that's fine, you can have a National Guard do these things, you know, like, why does that keep happening? And then when I got to 1848 and they finally kind of like depoliticized it and dismantled it, I was like, okay, they finally figured it out. And I wasn't happy about it, obviously, but I was just surprised.
I think it's not so much a case of figuring it out. I think it's also a case of being able to actually implement it.
Yeah,
You know,
because of all the fuck ups that happen here. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the thing is like that if you are the bourgeoisie, you're the big bourgeoisie. Like this is one thing I meant to say about the last paragraph. Like the logic of liberal reforms, you know, of like the Enlightenment, is socialism or communism, really, when you get down to it, you know. And this is it's under. What was I going to say? Shit. Sorry, 1 second. So to get the actual revolution through, to complete the bourgeois revolution, you still need that revolutionary part of the population, you know, the National Guard. It's still a force that had function, but like by this time it no longer had that function for them, and so they wanted to get rid of it, and also they were able to at that same point. And I think that's the point.
It's the point where you have the split between the political revolution and the social revolution. And the adherents of the political revolution don't have any use for a independent armed National Guard.
Precisely.
Hey,
anybody have comments?
having some Frycore around is very useful sometimes if you want to make sure revolutions don't happen. It's always good to have a side of Frycore.
We've been doing we've been doing some deep fat frying during the lockdown the last few weeks. Anybody else? That shit is tasty. Oh my god. Battered onions.
Ooh. Yeah, I think we call those onion rings in the US. It's delicious.
We call those onion rings too.
But in Ireland we have a different type.
Bomb.
But in Ireland we have a different type as well, where you get you have a large onion and you cut just a thick, just a slice that's maybe a centimeter thick of the whole diameter, like not just the ring, but the center, and then fry the whole slice solid, and that is damn tasty.
Does it come with potatoes?
It does.
Oh my god!
It does cabbage as well. Now.
Oh my god!
I'm joking.
I'm sorry, I just had to.
Trust my lucky charms. Now, let's see. Where are we? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm being quite disorganized today. I thought it was quite interesting here as well, where he talks about how they extolled Changarnier, the general, who led the action against the National Guard and the Social Democrats, and how he became to believe in his own great action, and how he was a savior of society and all this.
Yeah, the second Austerlitz is massacring unarmed people on the streets. You know, it's just amazing that is such a good pull from the first Bonaparte to the second.
Abe, your mic is muted still.
Sorry. When I read this kind of stuff, I am reminded of the people that I know in my life that have been attracted to militia stuff in the United States. In particular, some people I knew that became ex-socialists, actually, that became sort of sympathetic to the 3%ers. It's just there's this whole reactionary drift where you go from seeing yourself as the defender of society to the defender of society from these parasitic bits that will turn it in on itself.
Yeah, where is it in the Brumaire? I think it's chapter 1 or 2, where Marx just has this DJ Airhorn sentence about the more people save society, the fewer people the society. The fewer people in society they save it for, or something like that. So like the more people want to, the more saviors of society there are, the more they represent a minority of that society, or something like that. I think he put it a lot, more sassy than that, but it just echoes through this as well, I feel, with like these impotent masses, anarchic ne'er-do-wells who take to the streets, as opposed to the army, who's like they have their shit together and represent order and whatnot. And yeah,
it's gonna be interesting when we get to Marx talking about the lumpen proletariat, how much that logic actually is expressed in Marx as well.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, there's a long-standing. This is something we've been getting into on Swamp Side. We recently read Baudrillard, and I promise this is relevant. One of the things that Baudrillard gets on politically, one of the only things he has to say politically, is the way that the socialist tradition uses the social, the kind of abstraction of society, in a way that becomes defensive, conservative, reactionary. And yeah, I see that at work here. And I definitely know like Marxists or post-Marxists that drift in that direction very easily.
Okay. Sophie, how do you feel about a big sassy read?
I could do a big sassy read.
Are you reading from the screen? Is it large enough for you?
Yeah, I can see it.
Do you want me to make it bigger?
I always like it bigger.
Hey, now, here we go. Let me see here. It does this fucking jumping on when you make it bigger. It's really annoying. Okay, let me see. Oh, that's made it smaller. Oh god, let's make it bigger. That's made it smaller. God damn it! Why can't I do it? I keep on getting freaked out by which way it's gone. It confused me. Oh, here we go.
Did I make you too nervous, Tom?
Yeah, it makes me too nervous. Here we go.
Don't worry, babe. I got you.
I'm not going to make that mistake and think she's talking to me this time. Okay, let's go.
Okay. Finally, on June 13th, its power was broken, and not only by partial disbandment, which from this time on was periodically repeated all over France until mere fragments of it were left behind. The demonstration of June 13th was, above all, a demonstration of the Democratic National Guards. They had not, to be sure, borne their arms, but had worn their uniforms against the army. Precisely in this uniform, however, lay the talisman. The army convinced itself that this uniform was a piece of woolen cloth like any other. The spell was broken. In the June days of 1848, bourgeoisie and petty-bourgeoisie had united as the National Guard with the army against the proletariat. On June 13th, 1849, the bourgeoisie let the petty-bourgeois National Guard be dispersed by the army. On December 2nd, 1851, the National Guard of the bourgeoisie itself had vanished, and Bonaparte merely registered this fact when he subsequently signed the decree for its disbandment. Thus, the bourgeoisie had itself smashed its last weapon against the army. The moment the petty bourgeoisie no longer stood behind it as a vassal, but before it as a rebel, it had to smash it, as in general, it was bound to destroy all its means of defense against absolutism with its own hand as soon as it had itself become absolute. Blech.
you want to do the last sentence one?
Yes.
Yes.
This one,
Yes,
yeah.
I can. That sentence is a chonker. Wait, where does it begin? I'll
From
start at thus.
Thus, yeah, thus.
Yeah. Thus, the bourgeoisie had itself smashed its last weapon against the army, the moment the petty bourgeoisie no longer stood behind it as a vassal, but before it as a rebel. It had to smash it, as in general, it was bound to destroy all its means of defense against absolutism with its own hand, as soon as it had itself become absolute.
Okay, so for the bourgeois, the big rich bankers and all these industrialists, now that the petty bourgeois were standing up to them, they went, all right, lads, good luck now. Let's be having you. Get your jacket there, lads. Out you go. No more drink, boys. It's closing time. They fucked them off. But then all of a sudden, they were left with nobody with their back.
Right.
And they were facing the army alone. And the army was going to eventually turn on them when they said, why do we need these guys to be doing anything? We could do it all for ourselves, boys. Let's take a cut.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why do we need all these Bernie bros anyway? We could win an election without them.
Well, I just wanted to
Sorry.
shout out that last sentence as true Marxism. That's some real Marx writing right there. It's like so incredibly self-referential and reflexive that the sentence is tied up in knots. It's something you'd find in Capital. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I think in the comment of the last live stream, Erica, when I said there was one sentence in particular that was like 200 words long, Erica went and did the hard work and left it as a comment. I think it was 348 words. Erica, in the chat, you'll remember. But like, yeah, Marx can really put them together. For such a good writer, it's kind of incredible. Okay, I think we're down to the last paragraph of this chapter.
Woo!
Who wants to read it? Kyle, I think we're all the way back to yourself.
Yeah.
All right.
Bring the bombast, Kyle.
All right. Meanwhile, the Party of Order celebrated the reconquest of a power that seemed lost in 1848, only to be found again, freed from its restraints, in 1849, celebrated by means of invectives against the Republic and the Constitution, of curses on all future, present, and past revolutions, including that which its own leaders had made, and in laws by which the press was muzzled, association destroyed, and the state of siege regulated as an organic institution. The National Assembly then adjourned from the middle of August to the middle of October, after having appointed a permanent commission for the period of its absence. During this recess, the Legitimists intrigued with M, the Orléanists with Clermont, Bonaparte by means of princely tours, and the departmental councils in deliberations on a revision of the Constitution, incidents which regularly recur in the periodic recesses of the National Assembly, and which I propose to discuss only when they become events. Here it may merely be remarked, in addition, that it was impolitic for the National Assembly to disappear from the stage for considerable intervals and leave only a single, albeit a sorry figure, to be seen at the head of the Republic, that of Louis Bonaparte. While to the scandal of the public, the Party of Order fell asunder into its royalist component parts and followed its conflicting desires for restoration. As often as the confused noise of Parliament grew silent during these recesses and its body dissolved into the nation, it became unmistakably clear that only one thing was still lacking to complete the true form of this republic: to make the former's recess permanent and replace the latter's inscription, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, with the unambiguous words, infantry, cavalry, artillery.
I'm just going to point out that in the Swedish translation, the first sentence, meanwhile, the Party of Order, it does not actually say the Party of Order. It's it can instead, it can be read two ways. It can be read as the party of order, but it can also be read as the police.
There you go.
Nice.
Just pointing that out.
Oh,
I like that.
Kyle, in
Yes.
French, how would you say infantry, cavalry, artillery?
Oh my god, that's a good question. I'll have to get back to you.
I'll say it's infantry, cavalry, artillery. No, I'm joking.
I mean, I think that might
it's
be
probably.
it.
I think you're
Infantry,
right.
cavalry, artillery.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. You got the pronunciation.
Wow.
I really love that last line. He really finishes every chapter with a real zinger. Okay, so
Yeah.
what does this say? This says something to us about the difference between executive power and parliamentary power. It's one thing that kind of we look to the countries that have executive presidential power, like America, France. The parliament is entirely secondary. You know, who the hell gives a damn about what happens in America in the House of Representatives? Not much. It's like it's the executive or it's not. Like in England, in Ireland, say for example, it's the opposite. We have a kind of a totem presidential role, and nobody actually gives a goddamn about it. It's got no function. It's all about Parliament. So it says something interesting about the about how these forms, these kind of structures delineate political action in these different systems.
I will say though, from a Canadian perspective, looking in on the US, like Americans give a lot more of a shit about their senators than Canadians give about, backbencher or even cabinet MPs. Like it's not so total. The executive is not so total in America. But in France, you're absolutely right, Tom.
I mean, I would say
what is interesting to me. Yeah. Sorry, Ezra, go ahead.
No, it's okay. There's a lot of gridlock in Parliament. Excuse me. There's a lot of gridlock in Congress, and although people that are politically engaged may care a bit about their senator, like it's not like a general topic of conversation. More often, you get in a big city, the mayor will become a cultural figure, or sometimes the governor. So I think there's very much an executive bias in American institutions. And that's something that long-term observers of the United States have noticed, that you have an inverse relationship between the expansion of the franchise and the power of the legislature, essentially. So the more that representation becomes possible for a greater number of people, the weaker the institution that most, reflects their will or even potentially could becomes.
Yeah, I mean, his observations in, I believe it was chapter 1 about the contradiction between the legislative and the executive branch, leading to precisely this problem of you and whose army, is still spot on. And, what you talked about, Kyle, with regards to people not giving a shit about their MPs, I'm again reminded of just how incredibly different the Germanic system, and especially as implemented in the Nordics, is from the French American system. Because reading this, it's just even if you read in school or whatever that the U.S. political system is based off of French republicanism, reading this really hammers that home, right? You have the president, who is the one that actually matters, and then you have the parliament and the Senate and the Congress, wherever the fuck they do, who pass all the laws, but has has no executive branch to back them up, right? And like so coming at this from a Swedish perspective is really interesting, because the thought of dividing that is so alien to us, right? What we don't really have a legislative and executive branch in that way. What we have are autonomous authorities. So this is actually something that like, I hate to bring coronavirus into this. Like I feel this is like a cultural thing that has become more apparent to me as I watch foreign media report on the Swedish model of battling corona, as it were, because newspapers and the media keep asking the question, like, why isn't the Swedish government doing more, or enforcing harder restrictions, or going to lockdown, etc. And it's like, what, the government isn't doing anything. The government is not setting any policy. The government does not have, like, there's no separation between a legislative and executive branch. What we have are autonomous authorities,
but you have
manned by experts.
You have ministerial ministries. But
exactly, yeah. We have a team of non-politically affiliated medical and basically epidemiologists, and
the experts managed to have Sweden have the highest death rate per million in Europe.
Well, yeah, we can definitely talk about that as well. But like, it's amazing to me how different politics are in these two systems, where we have much more of a technocratic approach. Like, just let the experts handle it, and keep politicians out of the way, and let people self-regulate rather than. I guess that doesn't have that much.
The thing is, in America, those bodies existed, but the executive power just ran roughshod over them.
Well, of course they did.
I just mean to say, there was a period in American history where they set up those bodies. It's just kind of gone to a point where the executive's like, yeah, I don't give a shit about that.
Right. Yeah. Which goes back to Marx's point, right? That if you have this clear division, it leads to this contradiction that can't possibly work.
It's interesting. Like, we look at say the two major countries in the world, say, of like capitalist countries that have actually got a presidential system, are really America and France, the two early adopters of bourgeois, like the modern early adopters of bourgeois. And all the other European countries, after seeing what happened with the executive in France and a lot of the other colonies and everything around the place, they all implemented parliamentary democracies instead of executive authorities for fear of the Bonaparte. Is that true, do people think?
I don't know if that was like, I
No.
don't know if I could say it's explicitly like every other country that had that implemented a democracy was like, oh, we need to do parliamentary because, we're afraid of what happened in France and
Sophie, there's no presidential system in Europe. There's no presidential system in Europe.
I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm saying is I don't know if it was
presidential system.
Tom,
There is.
My point is that I don't think there was an explicit thought process of like, maybe there was. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but
I know there was. I'm sure there was.
Well, Tom. I just want to say one thing, which is that the French case, you kind of have it backwards, because the French case was a reaction to French political history. They were looking at the previous republic and the political divisions of parliament and implementing an extremely strong executive power so as to tie together France, because they believed that France could not govern itself in a parliamentary form.
So this is the experience of the first revolution and the drama.
No, it was the experience of the revolution prior to the experience of the Republic prior to the Second World War, where they couldn't get their shit together and the Germans just kicked their ass. And then, de Gaulle was like, well, enough of that. I'm going to set up a republic that is highly presidential, so that we actually have a strong country.
But was that not was a lot of it from the French? Like the French had like the biggest army in Europe at the time, and they had the worst strategy. The Germans just kicked their ass. Like you could,
but a lot of it was also the divisions between the left and the right, and the divisions between the socialists and the communists in government in France, which weakened the French considerably in the run up to the war. The strategic blunders were definitely a part of it, but like the fact that like Vichy France happened in the way it did was also a result of the dividedness of France.
Okay, fair enough. I take that on board. Yeah, fair enough. That's a bit of history I wasn't so aware of. But it is kind of interesting though that the model of the strong executive presidential thing has gone with the high bike in nearly all capitalist countries.
Yeah, you get it in like Singapore,
China.
Basically the only country where it seems to work is Finland, because those bastards make fucking everything work. They make schools work perfectly. Like they make social democracy work. They've had social democracy for as long as we have, and they still haven't fucked it up. Like I don't know what's with the Finns, but like they just managed to do the impossible, I guess.
We'll have to check their rate of profit. We'll have to go and look up their Finnish rate of profit. That could be.
I'm looking up their LGBT laws. Let's say.
In Finland, you get paid to go to college. You know that? You Americans do like that.
Yeah, you get a student salary.
Yeah,
hey, but trans people can only change legal gender after sterilization. So
not in Finland.
I just looked it up.
You sure?
After
is that still in the books?
After sterilization. What?
Yeah. You gotta be sterilized first. We can't have any ambiguity. Make sure all your bits don't work.
Good old social democratic eugenics.
Classic social democratic eugenics.
Yeah, I mean, we abolished that years ago. I mean, that hasn't been on Swedish books since 7 years.
7 years.
Hey, babe, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it was abolished in 2013, I think.
Yeah, it was recent, but I'm just saying Sweden's got a one up on Finland there. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, in your defense, like people didn't start like actually giving a fuck about trans people until about 7 years ago. So.
Yeah,
like everywhere.
Has it been that long?
It feels like it's been shorter, doesn't it?
It might be.
Okay.
Anyway.
I think is there anything else in this before I went off in that fucking?
There's a ton, but
yeah, let's have a.
Let's chew it.
Okay, so I think we've kind of. So, what do people think of the entire chapter? Then we've gone through the fall of the social democrats, the petty bourgeois social democrats. Any overarching thoughts now that we've finished?
Something I thought earlier I didn't get a chance to talk about is like, is there kind of a... So in this we see like the consolidation of the executive and the consolidation around like a would-be autocrat and Bonaparte. You get the smashing of the petite bourgeois, more or less. Now, does that mean that when it comes to like kind of enlightened despotism, which I think has become the predominant model of dictatorships in the 21st century, if some kind of like Bonapartist or pseudo-Bonapartist kind of like rerunning the constitution so the same guy can be president or prime minister forever, is one of the key things like giving the petite bourgeois a political voice versus not? Does that make a difference between like a liberal modern society versus like an illiberal modern society? or is there something more to it? Because, I'm just asking a question. I don't know.
Anybody want to take that?
Sorry, my internet was cutting in and out.
That was the longest gap ever.
I was busy. I was busy looking up if I was wrong about French history. I'm sorry. Could you restate the point, Sophie?
Yes.
So my question was, you get Bonaparte as part of consolidating, he smashed the petite bourgeois, and my question was, or there was a smashing of the petite bourgeois, and so my question was, does giving the petite bourgeois a political voice make the difference between a liberal modern society versus an illiberal modern society? So I'm just thinking about all the different like modern dictators, and they kind of follow a more or less Bonapartist model.
Interesting. I mean, yeah,
I'd
if
say
we're gonna
that's
put it in that model.
pretty apt.
Yeah. Like instead of just the one ruling faction getting a say, you get you kind of get your incoherent Green Party that could get it together, maybe.
Yeah, because I think of this like the modern Bonapartists being like America and the troops and like the 3%ers, etc. Whereas I see the petite bourgeoisie being a bit more like not necessarily even Silicon Valley types, but like
Well, what I was getting
Democrats
at,
seems
PMC,
what I was getting at with my
Democrats,
question
right.
was actually not like different factions or like different like politically or socially motivated actors like the 3%ers or etc., but rather like governments, right? Like comparing, the U.S. and like majority of Europe and a lot of the world now actually compared to like maybe Russia or I'm just trying to think of other examples of like kind of illiberal enlightened despotism. That's the first, like Putin is the first person that comes to mind when I'm talking about this. Like just
right. Okay.
Yeah, I think that the thesis you're putting forward, Sophie, is one that was basically official policy in America under the influence of modernization theory. The idea was that you build a middle class, aka the petite bourgeoisie, and that would build democracy. I'm just thinking about So if you're thinking about like liberal presidential republics like France, then the petite bourgeoisie is obviously on its smashed, and there is still some liberalism there. But if you're thinking about things like Putin, it's. I think you probably are more or less right. The only thing I'm wondering about is the case of Singapore, where when I talk to petit bourgeois people in Singapore, I think it was very much like the Second Empire in the sense that they might grouse about the executive power, and they kind of looked upon it as an alien thing in the sense that like court intrigue was really what decided what happened and not what the petite bourgeoisie was doing. But they were also kind of bought into it. Like they were like, nah, yeah, but they managed things pretty well. It very much reminds me of the Second Empire after Louis Napoleon wins, and you have what's his name, Haussmann takes over rebuilding Paris under a very technocratic program. That's kind of what it reminds me of.
That makes sense. I mean, I guess what I mean is like there exists a class of petite bourgeois, but they're not given a really big say in politics if they're given a say at all. It's kind of what I'm using to like differentiate between like a liberal bourgeois government versus an illiberal bourgeois government.
But if you look at the origins of say Putin in Russia, I would go kind of slightly against what you said, Kyle, that their policy wasn't to create a class of petty bourgeois. It was to create like the American policy was to create an actual class of bourgeois.
But that was after the eclipse of modernization theory.
Okay.
Modernization theory was an attempt to respond to Marxist sort of Soviet political programs in the global South, in the Third World, and by the time that the Soviet Union fell, those people were already out. And
so
Reaganism
modernization
was the
theory. Thing. When are we? What are we talking about in terms of decades here?
Roughly the 50s until the 80s. It's
post-war compromise.
Post-war compromise in its foreign policy form, which was literally a response to Marx. It was written as a response to Marx. Yeah.
Okay. So like because I mean the sort of Western consensus after World War II was, at least in part, built on Beveridge, right? So it is who I guess you could say is kind of the modern founder of social democracy. And what you mentioned about modernization theory was remarkably close to what I know as Beveridge's full employment in a free society, where you essentially so in a nutshell, the theory is that we can't have any more world wars. Why were there so many world wars? Well, because of inequality within nations and between nations. And so we can't have trade wars anymore, and we can't do like beggar thy neighbor, aggressive, like, dumping the prices on grain or oil in order to screw over the next, your neighbor, essentially, or monopolize stuff. So what we have to do is tax the fuck out of the rich, give it to the poor, have a lot of public investment, print money if we have to in order to keep everyone employed at full employment, and just make sure that we have a huge middle class and essentially have a normal distribution of income and wealth instead of a Pareto distribution.
Yeah, I mean, that's more or less where modernization theory was aiming, but you have to remember it was a program for the Third World. So it was much more concerned with the agrarian question and land reform, and what to do with the peasants, and how to create a proletariat, and how to create a middle class, how to create a petty bourgeoisie. So it wasn't oriented towards the First World. It was oriented towards the Third World. There's a book on this called Mandarins of the Future that is really good. I would recommend reading that one.
Cool. I'll check it out. On a different note, we should really read Full Employment in a Free Society, because I can't wait to have fisticuffs with you again, Tom, about MMT.
Oh, God. Tom needs a tag team partner for that. That's pro MMT. I mean, I'm just saying, in terms of fairness, because if you and Derek get in here, it's just going to be.
It's never fair. I kicked Derek's ass in the fucking in the question I did with him. I don't care what anybody says.
No, you didn't. No,
He started off and he ended up giving me conceding. I've been doing a number of interviews with TSSI people who are talking about endogenous money creation and fiat currency coming up to be released in the near future. So, and how it applies, how
that's not specific to MMT, Tom.
How is the single system like squareable with monetary theory? Anyway, we should not talk about this now.
Yeah,
it's not today talk.
No, but like
cut this
again. Full employment in a free society is a really good, really good.
Thanks for.
Sorry. Well, Emmanuel,
Thanks for coming by.
I'll take it on anyway.
Thanks for watching the stream, everybody. We should
I'll put you in a
now
headlock.
because we're going to talk about
we just
all
brought up
kinds of.
There we go.
we
There we go. Emmanuel, I'm going to put you in a headlock, and if you want, we could do an episode where we talk about that book, Emmanuel. But I'll have to read it. I've got about 3-4 books on the go at the moment. Do you know what? All these fucking podcast interviews are stopping me reading Capital Volume 3. I've got like about 400 pages to go on it. It's stuck like that for 3 or 4 years. It's a lot of bullshit.
Yeah, and you're out here lobbing MMT Kronstadt, basically, conversations where we're just going to be...
I'm glad that Vince McMahon was able to re-enter the conversation at the end there with the headlock and so on.
That's true.
Wrapping it
Vince
up.
McMahon.
Vince McMahon thought.
Okay, let's go to the chat and say hello to some people before we go. We got Grimlock, Jake P, Coco. We got Werner Fresswig. Hi, Werner. We got Benjamin Hanshu, Fugot Stank, Jake P, Stephen T. Who else? Erica Whelan, Shane Kaleli, Esri, myself, and is that the whole lot? Is that the whole lot?
Lax W 53.
Lax what?
LEXW 53.
Oh, who's that? I don't know that one.
I don't know. Oh, Coco. What's up, Coco? Yeah, you already said Coco.
Right. Let's take this bad boy offline. We've got 3 chapters.
Fugot. Hey, Fugot. Thanks for just subscribing to Swamp Side.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
Thanks to all the patrons in there. There are a few. There are.
Oh yeah, there's many Swamp
here.
Side patrons
Yeah.
here. So thank you for coming.
So thanks everybody. Yeah, we got 4 chapters to go. We've done 3 chapters in 5 streams. That means we'll do 4 in 8. So it'll be done in 13 streams as opposed to 24 for
You got it, dude.
Right. Let's take it offline.
Forever. Okay.
Love yous and leave yous forever. Forever. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.